Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again William Engdahl. William is a prolific author. We've talked to him in the past about The Gods of Money, which is, I think, one of the most important books that Americans should read to understand who is really behind the politics and the propaganda and everything that we get here in America. But more recently, his most recent book is The Lost Hegemon, Who the Gods Would Destroy. And that is a book we want to draw on today for the topic of today. The Americans basically think that the CIA is our friend, that the CIA is here to protect us Americans. And that is the question, is the CIA a friend or foe of ISIS? And that's was the question I posed for today's show, and we want to try to get some sense of that from Mr. Engdahl. Thanks for joining us again, William.
Thank you, Jay. I'm glad to be with you.
Always good to have you with us, and I want to tell people it's williamengdahl.com, ENGDAHL.com, williamengdahl.com. Go there and partake of many good articles that William writes and other information that you can get through that site, as well as purchasing his books. William, you've had some very interesting things to say about the failed coup in Turkey, and that's one of the things I want to focus on today, if we can. Your view is that the CIA was behind this coup, and I also believe that you wrote more recently that you think that was sort of a trial run, what we saw, and the real McCoy may yet lie ahead of us. Could you explain why you're suggesting that the CIA was behind this coup d'etat effort?
The organization inside Turkey that has been named by many people, not simply the Erdogan AK party, is an organization called the Fethullah Gulen organization. In Turkish, they abbreviated FETÖ, the Fethullah terrorist organization. It's outlawed in Turkey now since about a year and a half. The creation of the Fethullah Gulen is a 75-year-old something or other sitting in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania. If people know where that is, it's on the foothills of the beautiful Poconos.
Right.
And he's been there since 1988, 98, 99 in exile. And in 2006, he managed to get an extraordinary green card as an exceptional international scholar, over and above the objections, interesting enough, the objections of the lawyers for the U.S. State Department and also for Homeland Security, which at that time were watching out for potential Islamist danger organizations. And in their testimony, the State Department said that the Gulen organization is believed to receive money, and it has something like $50 billion worth of assets globally, including charter schools. I think they run 150 charter schools in the United States with taxpayer money.
We're talking Islamic charter schools, right?
Yeah. And what they've done in many cases, in Texas and other places, the state authorities began investigating charges of stealing the money, charges of bringing unqualified Turkish nationals in from Istanbul or wherever in Turkey they bring them, but members of the Gulen sect, in as teachers over and above qualified, certified American teachers, supposedly to teach English and history and various subjects that don't require a certain Turkish cultural bias. So the charter schools are used, and this has been quite documented, they are used kind of like the Church of Scientology as a recruiting ground for the sect. And they get young, impressionable adolescents and really put them through testimony of defected members who've gotten out and anonymously told about their experience. They were terrified to be identified. They describe it as a kind of brainwashing. You only read the writings of, it's like the early Jesuit order under Ignatius Loyola, it reminds me, but you only read the works of the great sage Fethullah Gulen, and then you're told what to do for your career. You're directed where to go. And in Turkey, what they have done over the last 3 decades, they've been active in Turkey, boring from within, is to infiltrate the army, which was the bastion of the Kemal Ataturk national state. Was the army as the guardian of the Constitution, is what Ataturk set up. And what they did, they knew, the CIA knew that they had to destroy that nationalist current inside the army if they were going to use Turkey as their cat's paw in the Islamic world and going all the way into China, because they're Turkic Uyghur people in Xinjiang province in western China, where all the oil and gas pipelines crisscross and so forth. So they built this thing. It's an amazingly vast organization. They have schools, hundreds of schools in Germany, and German politicians seem to be completely blind and take at face value when they say we're for peace and brotherhood. And so this was years ago, before the war refugee crisis last year. And so they are building schools all over Germany and recruiting people to their cult. And one German Islam professor in Marburg University, she's now retired, called the Gulen organization the most dangerous Islamist organization in Germany, because nobody suspects them of being militant, but they are. Well, in Turkey, they infiltrated the military, as I've said. The candidates to join the officer candidate school in the Turkish military, you have to go through rigorous, difficult examinations. Well, Gulen people got a hold of the examination and gave them the answers, so they got in with a breeze. And then once they were in, they promoted themselves up the ranks, and there was no internal intelligence, strangely enough, but it was kind of knocked out over the course of years, so that the nationalists had no idea how their officer corps was being infiltrated by this. So the coup d'etat, well, let me backstep a minute. Fethullah Gulen got an extraordinary green card against the recommendation of the U.S. State Department in 2006, 2007.
And the Homeland Security, you say, as well, right?
Yeah. On the intervention of 3 important people: Graham E. Fuller, the former CIA station chief in Turkey, and a fellow named George Fetus, a 31-year career man at the CIA. And by the way, Graham E. Fuller is an expert on Islam. He's the architect in the Reagan administration, Reagan-Bush, of the Iran-Contra strategy. He was up to his eyeballs in blood in the Mujahideen CIA operation against the Red Army Soviets in Afghanistan in the 80s. And that's kind of his whole life, is just wrecking things. So Graham E. Fuller, according to independent Turkish journalists, was on an island, 20 minutes boat ride from Istanbul on the night of the coup d'etat. Now, isn't that interesting? And the other person with him on the island is an old friend of his by the name of Henry Barkey, also a former CIA man, now at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a 30-minute drive from the home of Fethullah Gulen. Isn't that also interesting?
Yeah. Just...
So Barkey, these CIA figures with 17 other people, the hotel management couldn't identify them. They were all anonymous and very secretive, and went into a reserved room that was locked, and they stayed there most of the night. I guess they had to get food and drink in the course of the night, so the bellboys saw that they were watching the television broadcast of the failed coup as it on. But so they were right on the scene, and the involvement of the U.S. ambassador hasn't been documented, but it's my firm conviction. His name is John Bass, like the fishy guy. He was ambassador in Georgia when Saakashvili, this gangster, was U.S. choice as president of Georgia, before he had to flee for his life and go to Ukraine, where the U.S. set him up in a fallback place. And so he is now ambassador in Ankara.
Uh-huh.
And he was also in Iraq, had some very dirty dealings with Dick Cheney's Halliburton, and had to leave Iraq under a shadow. But it seems that U.S. ambassadors nowadays are not schooled in diplomacy. They're schooled in dirty tricks and regime change, coup d'etat, like what the CIA did.
Well, William, let me just stop you for a second. It seems to me, if we back up in this story with this Gulen character, Fethullah Gulen, that the CIA seems to be omnipotent in a sense, and that here over the objections of the State Department, I think you said, and Homeland Security, the CIA gets its way. I mean, as if the branches of the elected government have nothing to say about it.
Well, that's more or less. Keep in mind, this was Dick Cheney's tenure, 2007, 2006. Cheney Bush, but Dick Cheney was more or less running the show. And he would have weighed in on the side of the CIA to get Gulen in safe exile, because this was a huge global organization that spiderweb that they had created through the Gulen networks, and still have. They're as far afield as Sudan. They have schools in Nigeria, and so many countries. It's really in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, the former Soviet Union, Central Asian republics. They set up, and the former head of Turkish intelligence, before he passed away, wrote his memoirs and said it was documented that there were 130 CIA agents masquerading in those Gulen schools as native English teachers, and all of them diplomatic passports. Now, I, years ago, was an English teacher, and no one offered me a diplomatic passport. So I think this is a little bit strange.
There was a quote I'm looking for from your book from Gulen that essentially, and I can't find it right now, but essentially he was talking about how necessary it was to infiltrate and to go about your business as if you were a peaceful, loving, caring citizen within a society until you've gained enough power, until you have control of all of the institutions, essentially, or have infiltrated to the point where you have control, and then you really go after it. And so what you're saying is sort of plan.
I have the quote in front of me, actually.
Yes, please, if you could. Yeah.
In the 1990s, he told a closed-door assembly of his followers, which is secretly monitored by the Turkish intelligence when it was not a Erdogan government. Gulen said, quote, "You must move in the arteries of the system without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all the power centers. You must wait for the time when you are complete and conditions are right. Until we can shoulder the entire world and carry it, you must wait until such time as you have gotten all the state power in Turkey. Until that time, any step taken would be too early, like breaking an egg without waiting the full 40 days for it to hatch." Imam Fethullah Gulen.
Yeah, it reminds me very much of a quote going back way back in history to Cicero. He said, "A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly." Mm-hmm. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling through the alleys heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their arguments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to fear. The traitor is the plague. And so it seems to me what this guy has done is essentially he's followed that model, and he is infiltrated. And here he is in the Pocono Mountains in the United States, going about. He's a friend of the CIA. He gets cover and protection, and he has schools that are being planted in the United States too. These Islamic schools that are probably, perhaps, harboring the same kind of hatred towards the establishment. It is really incredible.
Yeah, your readers or listeners would do well to Google Fethullah Gulen charter schools in the U.S. And you'll get unbelievable series of articles of state investigation, police raids, and so forth. They've been charged with embezzling millions of dollars of taxpayer money.
Right.
And they simply don't care.
But he gets the protection from the CIA, and no doubt from Hillary Clinton when she's the president. Will be the same thing, right?
Well, she was Secretary of State, and he got that protection.
Yeah. Anyway, it's Fethullah is spelled Fetullah. Fethullah.
Hullah.
Yeah. So that they Google it. I would encourage my listeners to do that. Become aware of what is really going on. You're not going to hear any of this stuff in the nightly news. That's for sure. But
what they've done is very interesting. Instead of focusing on a coup d'etat attempt at a democratically elected president in a NATO country, they focus on the roundup that Erdogan's people are making of this Gulen network and saying this is anti-democratic without any proof that it's anti-democratic. This is a coup d'etat. This was a near thing.
Yeah, an outside coup d'etat by the CIA, no doubt, according to your work. At least that's the very well-founded.
And NATO, the
NATO.
Of NATO that's connected with people like General David Petraeus and so forth. This is a work that overlaps the Pentagon and the CIA.
Now, in your book, The Lost Hegemon, you provide a great deal of information and documentation. You document these connections between the CIA and ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood going way back in time to the Eisenhower years, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the connection between the Muslim Brotherhoods and the Saudis, who we've, of course, the devil that the United States has gotten in bed with its monetary regime and so on and so forth. But there's a very interesting chapter in your book where it talks about, when the walls of Germany, of East Germany, when the Soviet Union fell and the walls came down in Berlin. A very interesting quote there from Gianfranco Miglio, Italian professor, that talked about why, at that point in time, there were hopes and dreams that we could have a peaceful world, that we could go about having a peaceful world. But can you explain a little bit, maybe talk a little bit about what Mr. Miglio said, Italian professor said about why that didn't work out that way?
Well, the first thing to look at is why it was when the Soviet Union raised the white flag of surrender. Gorbachev said, "We can't manage it. We'll give you East Germany. Just don't put it into NATO. Don't bring NATO into the former communist countries like Poland and so forth. It's a national security issue. If you keep those countries neutral." All we want to do is to stabilize Russia's economy, to develop and be friends with the West. We don't want a Cold War anymore. And what happened? Well, the U.S. reneged on its promises, or Washington, as it does so often in history. They betrayed the trust that the Russians put into the U.S., that they were genuine in wanting peace and cooperation. They wanted to break Russia. They brought in George Soros and the Harvard shock therapy boys, Jeffrey Sachs and others, to prepare Russia for the most savage looting of any economy in history. And it was only in 1999 when a faction of nationalists in and around the young, briefly head of the FSB, the internal security, the former KGB, Vladimir Putin, who came out of St. Petersburg networks, they managed to get Putin first as prime minister under Yeltsin and then as president in complicated dealings by 1999. And this nationalist faction began to stop the hemorrhage, the draining of assets of corporations, the crown jewels of Russia that the West was stealing. And so suddenly the Western press started demonizing Putin and everything that Putin was doing as just the opposite of what it was.
Right. Okay, so we really only have about 2 minutes, a minute and a half or so left. Tie this in with what's going on now, the attempted coup d'etat on Turkey. Why would the CIA be trying to do this, and why also is NATO surrounding Russia right now with troops?
Well, this is all foreplay, NATO and the troops on the borders, but it's a dangerous foreplay. The Turkish Erdogan government, beginning in May, began secret back-channel talks with Putin to try to mend the rupture in relationships with the shooting down of the Russian jet over Syria late last year.
Sure.
And that resulted in an open agreement to resume talks about the Russian Gazprom gas pipeline to Turkey called the Turkish Stream, which was broken off after the shooting down, and to allow Russian tourism, which was a $10 billion industry for Turkey, a huge thing, allow those charter flights to resume, and a number of other negotiations on the economic front, and we don't know on the security front what was there. And part of the quid pro quo was that Erdogan and the Turkish government began a dialogue with Bashar al-Assad, who used to be a close friend of Erdogan, by the way, until the NATO faction inside Turkey began pushing this war and pushing Turkey's role in it. So I think the timing of it had very much to do with this tilt toward Russia, because Erdogan realized he was being set up, that the U.S. was about to take 45% of Turkish land area and give it to a Kurdish autonomous Kurdistan, together with land from Syria and together with land from Iraq and ultimately from Iran. And that is the name of the game of the U.S., and that's the name of the game, by the way, of, if you look at the map, of exactly where Daesh or ISIS has their stronghold, and where al-Nusra, the friends of John Kerry's moderate Islamists,
so-called moderate, yeah,
and that's it's part of this whole game. So
it's all economics. It's all about grabbing power, wealth for your own purpose, and to hell with the people you have to murder in the way.
Of course, oil and gas.
Yeah, oil and gas. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. William, thank you so much for being with us again and explaining this to us again. Go to William's website. It's very, very important. Lots of really great articles there. More importantly, buy his latest book, The Lost Hegemon, Whom the Gods Would Destroy. If you really want to understand what's going on behind the scenes, as opposed to the version you're getting from the nightly news, follow William Engdahl. It's really imperative that you do if you care about your country and if you care about the truth.